The destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BCE, the loss of the First Temple, and the exile to Babylon may, at first glance, seem like the end for the Judahites. Yet, despite this overwhelming trauma, the Judahites' faith in Yahweh, even as they live in Babylon, does not weaken. It only grows stronger. During this period, the Judahites, in an effort to maintain their culture, compiled the Torah and other biblical texts, laying the foundation for what becomes the Old Testament, the very core of their identity as a people. One could say it is precisely during this time of despair that the Judahites come to an extraordinary realization. They can still feel Yahweh's presence, even here in Babylon, even though they are here outside the Promised Land. This profound realization leads them to reimagine Yahweh, not as a small national deity tied only to Judah, but as a much greater, omnipresent, universal God of all nations, a God who oversees all creation. This is when Judaism, one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions, is officially born. This is when Yahweh becomes God. In 539 BCE, the Persian Emperor Cyrus the Great conquers Babylon. Cyrus shows kindness to the Jews, allowing them to return to the Promised Land, now called Yehud, a province of the Persian Empire, where they built the Second Temple. During this time, the Jews are significantly exposed to the teachings of Zoroastrianism, the main religion of the Persian Empire, considered, alongside Atonism from ancient Egypt, one of the world's earliest monotheistic faiths. In this context, Zoroastrianism introduces the Jews to a dualistic worldview. There is a supreme god, Ahura Mazda, representing light, good, and creation. And there is an opposing force, Angra Mainyu, embodying darkness, evil, and destruction. Zoroastrianism teaches that these two forces are locked in a constant struggle, with creation and destruction battling each other. These philosophical ideas prompt the Jews to consider the possibility that Yahweh, hence God, much like Ahura Mazda, might also have an opposing force, giving rise to his antagonist, Satan, from the Hebrew word Satan, meaning opponent. Zoroastrianism, moreover, also foretells that God will ultimately triumph over evil, and that humans are expected to take part in this cosmic struggle, their moral choices between good and evil determining their afterlife. The Jews, as a consequence, begin to reevaluate their concept of the afterlife. The Israelite afterlife, Sheol, previously imagined by Jews just as a gray, shadowy existence, now splits into a more vivid idea, one with a heaven where the righteous are rewarded, and a hell where the wicked are punished for their moral failings. Since the Babylonian exile, furthermore, Jews have pondered an important question. If Yahweh was with us while we were outside the Promised Land, how did he interact with us here on earth if he is transcendental, meaning beyond physical existence? Zoroastrianism provided them with an answer. In Zoroastrianism, Ahura Mazda is also a transcendental being like Yahweh, and to carry out his will, he employs a group of divine intermediaries called the Ameshaspentas, or Holy Immortals, who actively manage the universe and maintain the cosmic order. One very important detail: these divine intermediaries are not considered gods themselves, but share in the divinity of Ahura Mazda, acting on his behalf in the physical world. This idea led some Jews to consider that Yahweh, too, could have divine agents subordinate to him, acting under his authority, agents that would not compromise his monotheistic divinity, since they would be part of his divine essence. These divine mediators, or angels, came to be known as the Lesser Yahweh. Thus, while Yahweh remained the transcendental God, the creative mind, this new aspect of him, the Lesser Yahweh part, was envisioned as executing his will in the physical world. As if these changes weren't enough, in Judaism, ever since the division of the Kingdom of Israel, prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah had spoken of a future king from the line of David, a savior who would come at an unknown time to unify Israel again and usher in a new era of peace. A divinely appointed political leader, the Messiah. When Jerusalem was destroyed, the first temple reduced to ruins, and the Judahites exiled to Babylon, the anticipation of this Messiah, who could restore the kingdom of Israel, grew stronger than ever. When Cyrus the Great defeated the Babylonians and allowed the Jews to return to their land, some believe that, despite not being Jewish, Cyrus was the Messiah, foretold by the prophets. Zoroastrianism, through time once again, may have introduced an additional concept here. Zoroastrianism, after all, features a divine intermediator, Messiah-like figure too, the Saoshant, a human savior, who, in line with Zoroastrianism's central theme of the ultimate triumph of good over evil, is expected to appear at the end of times to destroy Angra Mainyu, hence evil, marking the apocalypse to restore good. This idea likely led the Jews to consider that the arrival of the Messiah would not only lead to the re-establishment of the Kingdom of Israel, but, on a grander scale, bring instead judgment against evil and eternal life for the righteous, laying the groundwork for the emergence of Jewish apocalypticism. Keep these theological developments in mind, because the concepts of a divinely appointed mediator sharing divinity with God, as well as those of the end of times and salvation, will, as we will explore later, eventually lead to the emergence of two new religions, Christianity and Islam. Back to history. The Persian Empire eventually falls to Alexander the Great, who embarks on a widespread campaign of Hellenization, spreading Greek culture and language as far as India. Alexander treats the Jews with respect, leading many Jewish elites to adopt Greek learning. After Alexander's death, his empire is divided among his generals, and the Jews come under the rule of the Greco-Egyptian Ptolemaic Empire. During this period, the Jewish elite translates the Hebrew Bible into ancient Greek, producing the Septuagint. However, a few decades later, the region is conquered by the Greek Seleucid Empire. The Seleucid Empire gradually loses territory to the Parthian Empire, becoming increasingly unstable. Frequent civil wars and political unrest plague the Seleucid Empire, making life difficult, especially for Jews, whose relationship with the Greek administration deteriorates into open hostility. As a result, the Jews repeatedly seek independence, but each attempt is brutally suppressed. King Antiochus IV Epiphanes, frustrated by the rebellious and difficult to subjugate nature of the Jews, exacerbates tensions by placing a statue of Zeus in their second temple and issuing decrees aimed at suppressing Jewish religious practices. He mandates violations of Jewish dietary laws, forces Jews to work on the Sabbath, bans circumcision, and imposes other prohibitions, leading to open persecution. One account from the persecutions, under King Antiochus, tells of a woman with 7 sons who was forced to feed pork to her children. When she refused, Antiochus tortured and killed her sons one by one in front of her, before eventually killing her as well. This ever-growing tension culminates in the Jewish Maccabean Revolt of 167 to 160 BCE, leading to a decisive Jewish victory, the removal of Zeus from the Second Temple, and the restoration of Jewish worship, a moment still celebrated today as Hanukkah. Following this revolt, after centuries of foreign domination, the Jewish Hasmonean dynasty emerges in 140 BCE, and for the first time in generations, the long-held dream of a united, sovereign Jewish nation finally seems within reach. The Hasmonean period provides a rare moment of Jewish political independence, a glimpse of what Jews had yearned for centuries, a time when they almost grasped the promise of a self-rule and national unity, their identity restored, their faith triumphant. Yet, as often happens with beautiful dreams, this triumph was fleeting, a nightmare disguised as the best of dreams. The Romans, in fact, had been expanding for centuries, from the Italian peninsula throughout Europe, their formidable armies defeating hundreds of tribes and nations across the continent. The Etruscans, Gauls, Carthaginians, the Greek kingdoms. Their monstrous expansion now reached the doors of the Hasmonean dynasty, an opponent hundreds of times larger. The Roman Empire was looming over Judea. In 63 BCE, the Roman general Pompey intervenes in a Jewish civil war and incorporates Judea into the Roman Republic as a client state, marking the beginning of Roman influence over the region. For the Jews, this new subjugation reignites the fears that the end of times could be near, a sentiment that spreads with growing intensity rapidly throughout the land. In 37 BCE, Herod the Great, a client king of the Romans, is appointed by the Roman Senate to rule over Judea. After Herod's death in 4 BCE, his kingdom is divided among his sons under Roman supervision, and Judea eventually comes under the direct governance of Roman procurators. The Jews feel lost. Amid Roman occupation and increasing Jewish unrest, Jesus of Nazareth emerges in the beginning of the 1st century CE, preaching a message deeply rooted in Jewish apocalypticism that had been developing since the Babylonian exile. The end of times is near. He speaks of the imminent kingdom of God and his calls for repentance, proclaiming that divine intervention, justice, and peace are on the horizon. Jesus' teachings, centered on love, mercy, and the rejection of worldly power, attract followers who see him as the potential Messiah prophesied in the Bible, a savior who might deliver them from oppression and suffering. However, his challenges to the Jewish religious authorities, particularly his claim to be the Son of God, are perceived as blasphemy. Meanwhile, his growing popularity causes concern among the Roman authorities, who view him as a potential political threat. After just 1 to 3 years of preaching, Jesus is ultimately condemned to death and crucified at Golgotha, likely between 30 and 33 CE. His death sends a wave of profound shock and devastation through his followers. They had expected something monumental, something world-changing to happen, and now stand dismayed, watching in horror as the man they believed to be the Messiah is executed in the most humiliating and gruesome manner imaginable. Crucifixion in Judaism is not just a death, it is a cursed death, a fate reserved for the utterly condemned. But, according to tradition, this is not the end. Against all odds, Jesus resurrects, shattering their despair and showing his followers that his mission on earth is far from over. His resurrection makes them consider the possibility that he was not merely a human Messiah, but something far greater, divine. When he ascends into heaven to reunite with God, their hope in salvation is not just restored, it is magnified. From this tragedy, a force will emerge in the coming centuries that will tear apart the Roman Empire from within. As the decades pass, the increasingly heavy taxes imposed by Roman authorities, combined with the severe mismanagement of the province of Judea by Roman officials, and the Romans' expectation that the Jews abide by their religious rules, including worshipping the Roman emperor, cause growing tensions among the Jewish population. These tensions lead to deep divisions within the Jewish community, with each group questioning how to respond to Roman occupation. On one side are the Zealots, militant anti-Roman nationalists, and on the other, the less reactive Sadducees and Pharisees. The escalating tensions make it clear that a conflict between the Jews and Romans is now imminent. The growing unrest ultimately leads to a massive rebellion in 66 CE, the First Jewish-Roman War. After an initially successful revolt, Roman General Vespasian slowly but decisively gains the upper hand. While Vespasian travels to Rome to be crowned emperor after a series of successful battles in the province, his son, General Titus, besieges Jerusalem. In 70 CE, after months of brutal siege, Jerusalem falls. The Second Temple, central to Jewish religious life, is utterly destroyed in Roman retaliation, and the city is set ablaze. Josephus recounts that up to 1.1 million non-combatant Jews are killed, and those who survive face an equally harsh fate, sold into slavery and scattered across the empire. The humiliation of the Jewish people does not end here. Following the sacking of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple, Roman emperors Vespasian and Titus seize the vast wealth looted from the temple, along with the profits of the sale of Jewish captives, to fund the construction of a colossal amphitheater. This structure, capable of holding 50,000 to 80,000 spectators, is designed as a place for public entertainment, where gladiatorial games, brutal executions, and mock sea battles entertain the Roman crowds. Today, it stands as one of the most iconic landmarks in Rome and Italy, the Colosseum. Even its construction carries a grim reminder of Roman dominance, as Jewish slaves are forced into labor to build it. When it is completed in 80 CE, its inauguration under Emperor Titus is marked with 100 days of continuous games, a celebration drenched in the suffering and destruction of the Jewish people. But the oppression does not stop there. After the destruction of the Second Temple, Emperor Vespasian imposes the Fiscus Judaicus, the Jewish tax, on all Jews across the empire. This tax, originally intended to fund their own temple in Jerusalem, becomes a cruel mockery, as it is redirected to support the Temple of Jupiter in Rome. The once independent Jewish people, as such, are not only physically crushed, but also financially burdened to sustain the very empire that destroyed their homeland and desecrated their sacred temple, a complete subjugation of both body and spirit. But the suffering is far from over. Several decades later, in fact, the increasingly repressive behavior of Rome leads to the Second Jewish Revolt, this time involving the Jewish diaspora across the eastern parts of the Roman Empire, in places like Egypt, Cyprus, and Cyrene, known as the Kitos War, 115 to 117 CE. It results in another brutal Roman response, with an estimated 200,000 Jews killed, once again demonstrating the unforgiving hand of Roman power. The decisive blow, however, comes just 2 decades later. Roman Emperor Hadrian makes a provocative decision to build a temple to Jupiter on the very site of the destroyed Second Temple in Jerusalem. This act feels like the final humiliation for the Jewish people. In 132 CE, under the leadership of Simon Bar Kochba, who is hailed as the Messiah, the Jews rise in what initially seems to be a promising revolt against the Romans, with hopes of regaining their independence. However, this revolt too ends in tragedy. Bar Kochba is killed, and his forces are utterly annihilated. By the end of the Bar Kochba revolt, Judea loses an additional 600,000 Jews and is left in ruins, severely depopulated. The Jewish-Roman wars as a whole result in the staggering loss of 1 to 2 million Jewish lives. What little remains of the Jewish population either desperately flees across the Middle East to places like Arabia and Mesopotamia, or scatters throughout the Roman Empire. Judea, once the heart of Jewish identity, had survived exile after exile, and even in the darkest times, hope remained. Briefly revived under the Hasmonean dynasty. But now, after the crushing defeat of Bar Kochba, that hope is gone. The Jewish people are fleeing in all directions, farther from their homeland than ever before. Their dream of unity, both as a people and in their land, now feels completely lost. After the Bar Kochba revolt of 135 CE, moreover, Jews are banned from entering Jerusalem, except on Tisha B'Av, the day commemorating the destruction of their temple. With Judea now nearly ethnically cleansed of its Jewish population, Emperor Hadrian seeks to deliver a final blow, to erase the Jewish connection to the land altogether. Here, we reach a pivotal turning point in history, and in our documentary. In an act of final mockery against Judaism, Emperor Hadrian renames the province of Judea as Syria Palestina to align it with the broader region of southern Syria. The name Palestina, derived from the Greek term Palestine, refers to the land of the Philistines, the ancient and long-extinct enemies of the Israelites. In this symbolic transformation, the land of the Jews is in name turned into the land of their historical enemies. From 135 CE onward, Judea, as such, becomes known as Palestine. It's important to note, though, that in this historical context, the term Palestine did not signify a revival of the Philistines, nor a continuation of the Philistine culture. Instead, Palestine became merely a term to describe a geographic region south of Syria. In fact, the adjective Palestinian, in this historical context, could now be used to refer to any resident of the province of Palestine, whether a pagan Roman citizen, a Palestinian Christian, or any of the remaining Palestinian Jews legally allowed to reside in the province. By the 3rd century, the Roman Empire is in decline. Its borders are constantly threatened by foreign invaders, and while the number of soldiers is increased to defend them, money runs low, and inflation spikes. Soldiers proclaim new emperors, but instead of re-establishing order, these emperors go to war against one another. Taxes rise, the purchasing power of the average Roman citizen plummets, and wars make the roads unsafe. Meanwhile, the bodies of the deceased, left unburied, spread diseases and cause epidemics. In this seemingly apocalyptic context, the crumbling Roman stability leaves citizens increasingly disillusioned with their pagan faiths, prompting them to seek new religions that offer hope. Roman authorities, who once persecuted Christians for refusing to worship the emperor, now witness Christianity rapidly spreading throughout millions of Roman households. It's growing out of control, with the conversion of Emperor Constantine the Great to Christianity, and the Edict of Milan in 313 CE. All religions, including Christianity, are legalized. Later, under Emperor Theodosius, the Edict of Thessalonica in 380 CE makes Christianity the official religion of the empire. Palestine, due to its association with the life of Jesus Christ, becomes a major center of Christian pilgrimage. Jerusalem, Nazareth, and Bethlehem are transformed into religious hubs. Churches spring up across the empire, and Emperor Constantine orders the construction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Pagan temples are also converted into churches. Jerusalem, Caesarea, and Gaza emerge as economically thriving cities. However, Jews and pagans often faced persecution, with Jews still forbidden from entering Jerusalem, except on Tisha B'Av, the anniversary of the destruction of their temple. Christianity, which has now surpassed Judaism as the major religion in Palestine, has evolved significantly and distanced itself from its Jewish origins since the time of Jesus' preaching in Judea. A couple of centuries earlier, in fact, as early Christians moved from Judea into eastern parts of the Roman Empire to spread the Gospels, they became more familiar with Greek and Latin traditions. In this process, they delved deeper into Greek philosophy, particularly the concept of the Logos, the divine word that drives creation. As the New Testament was also compiled in Greek, a transformative idea began to emerge. Jesus, who had once been seen by his Jewish followers as merely a human Messiah, following his resurrection, was now viewed as something far greater. Much like the relationship between Yahweh and the lesser Yahweh we explored during the Babylonian exile, Jesus was no longer seen as just a human intermediary appointed by God. With the Holy Spirit, and as formalized in the Nicene Creed of 325 CE, Jesus was now understood as part of God's divine essence, not separate from him, but God incarnate himself, the Trinity. This is how, at least to Christians, Jesus became God. As Christianity evolves and distances itself further from its Judaic roots, Jews, in the eyes of many Christians, begin to be viewed with growing hostility. Jews are often blamed for the crucifixion of Jesus, which Christians now understand as the death of God incarnate. This leads to increasing resentment and the belief that Jews must be punished for having killed God. As the Roman Empire crumbles, a critical split occurs in 476 CE, with the Western Roman Empire rapidly disintegrating. The Eastern Roman Empire, now known as the Byzantine Empire, struggles to regain control of the Western territories, but ultimately fails to restore the empire to its former glory. During this period, Palestine, now under Byzantine rule, is divided into three administrative units: Palestina Prima, Palestina Secunda, and Palestina Tertia. Palestine's strategic position as a gateway to Egypt, Arabia, and Syria makes it a frequent target for military campaigns from both Persians and Arabs. In response, the Byzantines heavily fortify the province to protect against these threats. While the Byzantines are desperately trying to recover fragments of their former territories in the west, they also face relentless battles in the east against the powerful Sassanid Persian Empire. The Romans and the Sassanid Persians, in fact, have been locked in conflict for centuries over control of the Caucasus, Armenia, and Mesopotamia. But now that the Eastern Roman Empire stands alone against the Sassanids, military spending spirals out of control. In 614 CE, the Persians launch a successful invasion of Palestine, dealing a crushing blow to the Byzantines. They secure Jerusalem, leaving widespread destruction in their wake. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is reduced to ruins, and the True Cross, one of Christianity's most sacred relics, is taken by Persian forces. Jews support the Persian campaign, hoping to reclaim Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. In the ensuing conflict, up to 60,000 Christians and 5,000 Jews are killed. Despite this devastation, Byzantine Emperor Heraclius recaptures Palestine from the Persians in 629 CE, retrieves the True Cross, begins rebuilding the region, and resumes the persecution of Jews for having sided with the enemy. However, while the Byzantines rebuild Palestine, a new force rises unnoticed in the south, in the deserts of Arabia. Before the Byzantines and the Sassanids can react, an army forged in a newfound faith stands at their borders, swift, powerful, and entirely unexpected: Islam. While war was raging between the Byzantines and the Sassanids, significant changes had been happening in Arabia for decades. Arabia, historically a cluster of divided polytheistic tribes, so much so that the Kaaba in Mecca was surrounded by hundreds of idols of polytheistic gods: Hubal, Alat, Al-Uzza, Manat, and many more, was now rapidly transforming. With the arrival of Jews fleeing Judea after the Bar Kochba Revolt of 135 CE, as we have discussed previously, and with the Roman Empire's conversion to Christianity in 380 CE, which led to Christian missionaries being sent far and wide through the Middle East to secure allies against the Sassanids, Arab tribes were increasingly abandoning their polytheistic beliefs and converting to the new Abrahamic monotheistic faiths, Judaism and Christianity. Several Arab tribes, such as the Ghassanids, Tanuhids, Taglibs, and Kindites, had already embraced Christianity, while Yathrib, modern-day Medina, had become a major Jewish settlement in Arabia. Things had reached such a critical point that even Yemen fully converted to Judaism. In this seemingly apocalyptic context, where the Arab identity was being squeezed between the growing influence of Christianity and Judaism, a new prophet, Muhammad, emerged. Instead of resisting the spread of these two monotheistic faiths, Muhammad aligned with them. He didn't just destroy the idols of the many gods surrounding the Kaaba in Mecca. He crushed them, proclaiming that he was no ordinary prophet, but the final prophet in a long tradition that had begun with Adam and continued through Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. He stressed that throughout history, thousands of prophets had been sent by God all over the world to guide humanity towards monotheism. But many of these prophets had been ignored or killed, their message lost. Muhammad declared that all of these prophets, like him, were Muslims, those who chose to submit to the only true God, Allah. His followers, he said, had to do the same, submit to the one true God, Allah, a name that literally means the God, in contrast to the many false ilah gods that Arabia had worshipped until then. Arabs, as such, had to return to what he proclaimed as the original faith of Arabia, the monotheism of Abraham. And to make sure they understood the gravity of his message, much like Jesus before him in Judea, Muhammad, between Mecca and Medina, issued a stark warning to the masses. The end of times is very near, and there will be no more prophets after me. Those who fail to follow this warning now risk eternal damnation. This is how, at least to Muslims, after Yahweh became God to the Judahites, and after Jesus was elevated to divine status in Christianity, Allah became the God in Islam. If you want to explore pre-Islamic Arabia in all its beauty and detail, once this video ends, check out our two documentaries, The Unbelievable Origins of Islam, From Stone Preaching to Polytheism to Allah, and The Original Kaaba and the Other Kaabas, The Houses of Gods Made of Stone Above Wells. In the few years before his death, Muhammad, with an ever-increasing number of followers, had already conquered the Hijaz of Arabia, the southern part of Yemen, and the eastern part of what is now Oman. After the death of Prophet Muhammad, Islam spread like wildfire. Within just a decade, the Arabian Peninsula was unified under Caliph Abu Bakr, with Islam serving as its binding force. 30 years later, under Caliph Umar, the Islamic troops, driven by the shared belief that the end of the world was near, and convinced the promises of Allah in the Quran of massive heavenly rewards, saw jihad, the spread of Islam through warfare and death on the battlefield, as the ultimate gateway to the gifts of heaven. In the Battle of Yarmouk, the Islamic armies achieved a massive victory against the Byzantines, seizing Palestine. Just a few months later, at the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah, the Islamic forces similarly conquered the fertile lands of Mesopotamia, delivering a crushing blow to the Sassanid Persian Empire, which soon fractured into pieces. A few years later, the richest province of the Byzantines, Egypt, the breadbasket of the Byzantine Empire, was similarly conquered, followed by the remainder of Persia. The Rashidun Caliphate under Umar, with capital in Medina, now controlled Egypt and Mesopotamia, the two most agriculturally productive regions in the Middle East. At the very beginning, truth be told, the Byzantines and the Sassanids did not fully comprehend who they were really dealing with or what Islam truly was. The Byzantine authorities, in fact, at first, perceived Islam as merely a heretical offshoot of Christianity, as just another Christian denomination that simply denied the divinity of Jesus, ending up confusing them with the Miaphysite Christians, a type of Christians who were actually very common in the southern provinces of the Byzantine Empire, particularly in Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. Additionally, the mutual exhaustion from years of war between the Byzantines and the Sassanids left both empires severely weakened. Their armies, increasingly composed of mercenaries, lacked the commitment needed to secure victories. In contrast, the Muslim armies were unified, highly motivated, and not only ready to die, but also actively seeking death on the battlefield just to propagate Islam. As a result, Islam, just in a few decades, became the dominant religion in the Middle East. When Caliph Umar entered Palestine, fear gripped the local population. The uncertainty was overwhelming. What would these new conquerors bring? Destruction? Forced conversion? Or something even more terrifying, yet unknown? To the surprise of many, Caliph Umar greeted the local Christians and Jews and respected their places of worship. This unexpected behavior stems from the Quran. Jews and Christians in Islam are considered people of the book, on par with Muslims for worshipping the same God of the Abrahamic tradition. Caliph Umar, as such, instead of causing harm to the local population, introduced an unexpected but much desired policy of religious tolerance on the table, a very appreciated gift, especially for the long persecuted Jews that now felt relieved. The major change under Islam, though, was that, as the Islamic armies required one to be Muslim to enroll, Jews and Christians were not allowed to join, nor forced to be drafted, but in exchange had to pay a tax called jizya to be protected by the Islamic armies in case of war, earning them the status of dhimmi, protected people, similar to the zakat tax that Muslims had to pay to the caliphate. However, the Islamic teachings that ruled over the dhimmis did not view Jews and Christians as positively as Umar made it seem. A significant portion of the Quran, in fact, openly critiques the children of Israel, the Israelites, for their historical disobedience to God's commands, very similar to how the ancient Judahites had criticized the Israelites from deviating from the early tenets of Judaism after the division of the Kingdom of Israel, as we saw in chapter 1. The Quran, moreover, also criticizes Christians for elevating Jesus, a human prophet, to divine status. These critical views may have had historical roots, particularly in Muhammad's strained relations with Arab Jews. When Muhammad first claimed to be the final prophet in the Abrahamic tradition in Arabia, Jewish rabbis refused to recognize him and even mocked him for considering him a false prophet, leading to the ongoing tensions between Muhammad and the Jewish communities of Arabia. Some Islamic scholars, as such, interpret Surah al-Fatiha, recited in every Muslim prayer, as an implicit warning to Muslims not to repeat the mistakes of the Jews, who were seen by Muslims as having been blessed with divine guidance through the Torah and Gospels by God, yet still incurring God's anger, and of Christians for defying a prophet instead of worshiping God alone. Returning to history, in Palestine, Arabic, as such, replaced Greek and Latin as the administrative language and, over time, economic incentives such as lighter taxes, opportunities for state employment, and other advantages contributed to religious conversions to Islam, gradually transforming Palestine from a predominantly Christian and Jewish land into a more Muslim one, with many Arabs now settling in it for business. Palestine, thus, became a land shared by Christians, Muslims, and Jews alike. Following the split of the Rashidun Caliphate, the Umayyad dynasty took control, expanding the caliphate's borders as far west as Spain and as far east as modern-day India, with the capital in Damascus, Syria. Meanwhile, in Palestine, significant construction projects were underway. According to Islamic tradition, during the Isra and Miraj journey, Muhammad flew on a winged horse, Burak, from Mecca to the farthest point of prayer, known as Aqsa in Jerusalem, as early Muslims prayed toward this location, before praying towards the Kaaba in Mecca. From this site, Muhammad is said to have ascended through the heavens, where he met angels and encountered previous prophets, such as Adam, Moses, Abraham, and Jesus. During this journey, Muhammad, importantly, is said to have met with Allah, who reduced the required daily prayers from 50 to just 5. To commemorate this miraculous journey and reinforce Jerusalem's significance in Islam, the Umayyads began constructing the Al-Aqsa Mosque, also known as the Dome of the Rock, on the Temple Mount in 685, completing it by 715. This solidified Jerusalem as the third holiest city in Islam, after Mecca and Medina. Thus, Jerusalem became a holy city for 3 religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Though, truth be told, the importance of Jerusalem was not equally shared. While the word Jerusalem, for example, is found 660 times in the Old Testament, Judaism, the New Testament, Christianity mentions Jerusalem 146 times. While in the Quran, Islam, Jerusalem is never actually mentioned, just implicitly interpreted as such, during the Isra and Miraj journey of Muhammad, on the winged horse Burak to Aqsa. Returning to history, the Umayyads were later overthrown by the Abbasid family, who moved the capital from Damascus in Syria to Baghdad in modern-day Iraq, with Palestine becoming increasingly Muslim. By the 9th century, Abbasid power began fragmenting into smaller states, and the Shiite Fatimid dynasty from North Africa eventually took control of Egypt and Palestine in 969. During their rule, the Fatimids persecuted both Christians and Jews, often demolishing their churches and synagogues. In the meantime, in Islamic Spain, Christians had already begun a centuries-long effort to reclaim their lands from the Muslims in a campaign known as the Reconquista. In the Middle East, the Islamic forces continued to advance, even threatening Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, posing a direct threat to Christian Europe. By the 10th century, a new military power in the region, the Seljuk Turks, originating from Central Asia, had converted to Islam and began sweeping through the Middle East, from the east creating the Great Seljuk Empire. In 1071, the Seljuk Turks won a decisive victory against the Byzantines at the Battle of Manzikert and rapidly expanded in Anatolia soon after, funding the Sultanate of Rum. This defeat gravely alarmed the Byzantine Emperor in Constantinople, for he could not stop the advance of the Turks in any way. Desperate, the Byzantine Emperor increasingly asked for support from the rising Catholic kingdoms in Europe to oppose the seemingly unstoppable Seljuk advance. In 1073, the Seljuk Turks also captured Jerusalem and prohibited Christian pilgrimages to Palestine, effectively also cutting off European trade routes to Asia, further escalating tensions between Christians and Muslims to unprecedented events. In response, Pope Urban II in Rome, capitalizing on the growing desire for revenge among the Christian population of the European kingdoms, called on soldiers from all corners of Europe to join a holy war against the Muslims, to free Palestine and Jerusalem and bring them back under Christian control. As such, up to 160,000 heavily armored soldiers gathered from across Europe, motivated by their Christian faith to reconquer the Holy Land. They marched through the Balkans, passing through Constantinople into Asia Minor, battling their way into Syria and Palestine, and ultimately besieging Jerusalem in one of the bloodiest sieges of the medieval period, resulting in the death of 70,000 Muslims and 5,000 Jews. The Crusaders, in this effort, established several Christian kingdoms in Palestine, known as the Crusader States, and maintained power for almost a century. 100 years later, the founder of the Ayyubid Sultanate, Saladin, recaptured Jerusalem from the Crusaders after the Battle of Hattin, increasingly re-establishing Muslim control over Palestine. Due to the constant offensive attempts by surrounding Muslim forces, 7 more crusades were launched from Europe. This prolonged conflict between Christians and Muslims resulted in one of the most tragic stalemates in history, with much of the bloodshed occurring in Palestine. Depending on different scholarly estimates, over the 200-year period of the Crusades, anywhere between 2 to 9 million people lost their lives. With the rise of the Mamluks in Egypt in 1250, the Mamluks inherited the territories of the Ayyubids, and in 1291, successfully and definitively defeated the Crusader states, re-establishing full control over Palestine as Muslim land. However, the Mongols, advancing from East Asia, had created the largest empire the world had ever seen up to that point. The Mongols approached Baghdad, the capital of the Abbasids, which was under Turkish protection, with an army of 140,000 soldiers. In just 13 days, the Mongols besieged and destroyed the city, executed the Caliph, and brought about the collapse of the Abbasid dynasty. They also razed to the ground both libraries and centers of learning, burning hundreds of years of Islamic culture. According to Muslim sources, up to 2 million people were killed. Many historians believe that the Muslim world never fully recovered from this catastrophic event, marking the end of the Islamic Golden Age. The power vacuum inside the Middle East caused by the Mongol invasion also led to the collapse of the Great Seljuk Empire and to the further fragmentation of the resulting Seljuk Turkish states into smaller entities. The Sultanate of Rum in Anatolia splintered into smaller Turkish emirates, among which the Ottomans rose to power between the 14th and 15th centuries. With Anatolia as their core, the Ottomans now rapidly expanded, taking advantage of the post-Mongol political instability in the region. In 1453, now that the Byzantine Empire had been reduced to little more than the city of Constantinople, Ottoman Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror, after 53 days of intense bombardment of the walls of Constantinople with large cannons, successfully breached the city's defenses and conquered it, marking the end of the medieval era and the beginning of the modern age. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves throughout Christian Europe, and within less than a century, the Ottomans would conquer much of the Balkans, North Africa, the Caucasus, Palestine in 1517, Mesopotamia, and the Hejaz, securing control over all the pilgrimage sites of the three Abrahamic religions: Jerusalem, Nazareth, Bethlehem, Mecca, and Medina, establishing themselves as one of the most powerful empires the world had ever seen. During their administration of the region, the Ottomans integrated Palestine into what became known as the province of Ottoman Syria. They then divided it into two eyalates, one centered in Aleppo, governing the north, and another in Damascus, overseeing the south, including Palestine. In their pursuit of dominion, the Ottomans effectively also closed European access to the Middle Eastern trade routes to India once again. Consequently, European merchants, now desperate to maintain links with the Middle East, had to find alternative routes, igniting the age of European exploration. During this period, Portugal succeeded to reach India by circumnavigating Africa, while Christopher Columbus, sponsored by Spain, sailed west across the Atlantic, ultimately reaching the Americas and forever changing the course of history. Throughout most of the Ottoman period, Palestine, as explained earlier, much like in Roman times, remained part of the larger province of Syria. Over the centuries, however, Arab Muslims became the majority, while Arab Christians and Jews formed a tolerated minority. Economically, Palestine fell behind other parts of the Ottoman Empire, with most of its population now consisting of farmers who continued traditional agricultural practices without much development. Under Ottoman control, few significant events disturbed this long continuity. In 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte nearly captured Palestine, and in 1831, Egypt's Ottoman governor led a rebellion that briefly took control of the region. Aside from these episodes, Palestine, truth be told, remained largely unchanged for nearly 4 centuries, growing progressively more Muslim and Arab until the start of the contemporary era, which we'll explore in Chapter 4. Yet, before we close this chapter, as we enter the 19th century, what about the Jews? They were central to this story in the beginning, but for much of the last chapter, their presence has faded. Where had they been over the past 1700 years since the Romans expelled them from Judea after the Bar Kochba Revolt in 135 CE? Well, after the fall of the Hasmonean dynasty and the defeat of the Bar Kochba Revolt, the Jewish population in Judea sharply declined. Many were killed, and many more fled, scattering in all directions to survive. Much like during the Babylonian exile, Jews once again became Hebrews, wanderers without a homeland. Wherever they tried to resettle in pagan Roman Europe, Jews encountered hostility simply for being different. With the spread of Christianity throughout the Roman Empire, this stigma worsened. Jews were now not only seen as outsiders, but also labeled as the killers of God, accused of being responsible for Jesus' death, a belief that further damaged their reputation in the predominantly Christian societies they now lived in. During times of disaster, such as epidemics, Christians saw these crises as divine punishment and blamed Jews for causing these misfortunes through conspiracies. Jews were often attacked or even killed, as though they had brought on God's wrath, reinforcing the idea that behind any misfortune, there was always a Jew orchestrating it from behind the scenes. As Christian kingdoms evolved into organized states over the centuries, they imposed increasingly strict regulations on their Jewish populations. New laws specifically targeting Jews, requiring them to pay extra taxes merely to be tolerated. Rooted in religious beliefs, many of these regulations often conflicted with Jewish practices, especially in areas like trade and finance, which forced Jews to operate in the shadows. Those who managed to succeed despite these restrictions, sometimes even becoming the wealthiest in their neighborhoods, were envied by Christians, who called them pigs. This label carried a double meaning. First, because abstaining from pork was a distinct marker of Jewish identity, and second, because the pig in Christian symbolism represented the Jew as a rule breaker, driven by greed to maximize profit. Over the centuries, the rising tensions between Christians and Jews increasingly pushed Jews to gather in close-knit neighborhoods called Jewish ghettos. As Western Europe grew even less welcoming, many Jews chose to move eastward, establishing large Jewish communities in Poland, Russia, Romania, and other Eastern European countries. By this time, few Jews still spoke Hebrew as an everyday language. Hebrew remained only in their prayers. In daily life, they spoke Polish, Russian, German, Italian, Romanian, French, and so on. Some were no longer religious either, and as such, some Jews preferred the term Hebrew to reflect their cultural roots rather than their faith. Yet, even through these centuries of hardship, a quiet hope remained. That one day, the Hebrew people might, once again, have a land of their own, where they could live without oppression. For some, any land. For others, specifically the land their ancestors once lived in before being driven out, the long-lost Promised Land. This is the end of part 2. There are 4 parts in total. Since this documentary requires extensive editing, we decided to release it in 4 parts, rather than making you wait for the full version. Once all 4 parts are complete, we will combine them into a full-length documentary. If you'd like to support our mission to spread knowledge, consider becoming a Patreon member, sending a super thanks donation here on YouTube, or joining as a channel member. Please, do not donate through Apple Pay, as Apple will take a 30% cut. Your support helps us speed up video production and expand to more languages worldwide, such as Spanish, French, German, Italian, Brazilian Portuguese, Indonesian, Hindi, and much more, reaching an even broader audience. Thank you very much for waiting. We hope you've learned something new today. Have a great day.